see, that one's 2 inches wide. These are all 1.25 inches. That's all 1.25 inches, and there's another 2-incher, and that's on the upper. Gotcha. And then there's all the drawers, so it's all 1.25 inches. Oh, here's one, the dryer. It's got a 2-inch face frame on it. And then there's all these drawers, so we're gonna have to make sure we've got stock for all that too. I think we'll work on the face frames first. That'll also give us the chance to kind of look at some different finishes, and then we'll circle back and work on the doors and the drawers. Well, it's got a lot of curve in it, or cup I guess it would technically be, but since we're going to be ripping that into smaller strips, that's going to be negated because we're not going to be treating this as one large board. So as long as we can cut maybe somewhere in here, and maybe basically make 3 boards out of that, I think we'll end up fairly well negating that amount of cup. Feels like this stuff is dried out pretty good. Came out of the boneyard, and it's feeling pretty good. It's got a little bit of warp in it too. Yeah, I think that'll all be negated because we're going to cut shorter boards out of it. So I think overall these kind of wonky boards will work out. I'm thinking, because I'm working alone, probably set up this table configuration so that we've got some support for ripping longer boards. We got 11 3/4, 11 3/4, and 11 3/4. This one's 14 and change. So 11 3/4 is going to be 2 15/16 each board. So we'll go 2 15/16. Let's go about 32nd. We are up and running again. It's actually been quite a while since I worked on this project. Life kind of got in the way. So if this is the first cabinet project video that you're watching, you'll have to jump back quite a ways because a lot of life happened between now and when we stopped working on the cabinets. We basically designed this entire cabinet project for our laundry kitchenette area. And then we did some crazy cutting. We got kind of bold and aggressive, and we blindly cut everything. And then we spent several days putting everything together, and everything fit. And then that's kind of where I stopped. There's a lot of time in there discussing each step of this project so far, getting the boxes cut, cutting the drawer stock, putting everything together, assembling and installing the slides for the drawers, and man, the learning curve on this stuff is super steep. We're using a shopsmith for this project. It's something we picked up at an estate sale a couple of years ago, and we spent a couple of days calibrating this thing too. So if you haven't seen those videos and you're kind of curious what it takes to get something to cut super precise, jump back and watch those videos. I learned a lot, and I'm super glad that we took the time to do that because so far the cabinetry that we've been building has been fitting super good. So basically the carcasses are done. The boxes are all built. The drawers are all installed, and the only thing left to do, well, I guess there's a lot of things, but the couple of 3 things left to do to the cabinets themselves is to build the face frame. That's an important term. If you jump back in our videos, we talk about the different styles of cabinets, and we're building what's called a framed cabinet with inset doors and drawers. So in the end, the frame and the doors and drawers will all be flush with one another. But they're not flush with the cabinet, which is what's called a Euro style. Anyway, not to get too into detail with that stuff, but we're building a framed cabinet, and then we're going to end up building the faces for the drawers and the doors, and then all of that will get attached to the front and the front of the drawers, and that's what will produce the actual visual part of the cabinet that you'll see. Of course, all this will be behind that, and you'll only see this when you open a drawer or a door. This part of the process, well, I guess to be frank, all the parts of this process are fairly new to me. There's a couple of tools that I haven't really spent much time with. This takes me way back to a couple of classes of wood shop when I was a teenager in high school. One is the edger joiner. That's the tool that we just used a second ago to put a square edge on this board. I'm going to be honest, and all you smart woodworkers out there already picked up that board was way too big to put through this joiner with one guy. It's a fairly small table on the joiner, so it's very hard to manipulate. And the board was long, so I'm not sure that we got a really good edge on that. We'll talk about that more later. But basically, for those novice woodworkers out there, this tool, the edger joiner, it has a lot of different functions, but what we're using it for primarily today is to make things flat. So these boards were actually offcuts from the timber frame that we built. We spent a little bit of time kind of looking through our boneyard, and we found stuff that had fairly vertical grain, or some of it in there. And that way we end up with a fairly dimensionally stable piece of lumber. You could do an entire video on how to saw lumber, etc. But for the sake of this video, what you really need to know is that this grain out here that's on the side is not purely vertical. It's nearly vertical on this board. But this board right here is going to be more dimensionally stable than this whole board all the way across, because as the grain goes down here and up here, you get tension as the board dries and it can cup. We don't want cup in our boards. But if we start slicing this board into smaller boards, we start ending up with different grains. For example, the grain here is very horizontal, but that should be fairly stable as long as we sever it and it's not connected to this grain. And then this grain should be fairly stable as well. The challenge today is that we're taking these basically rough sawn boards and we're trying to turn them into something that's closer to finish grade. I mean, you can see how rough this stuff is. It's very, very rough, and the dimensions are kind of all over the place. It's what you get when it comes off the sawmill. And when we're all done, we want things to be a nice square board with a nice flat surface, a nice square edge, so that when we go to put everything together, they fit nicely. And then we also need to dimension the thickness. We started out with 1.25 inches on most of these boards, and we're going to be taking this stuff down to 3/4 of an inch, all said and done. So what I'm working on right now is getting these boards dimensioned down to something that's more manageable. So the primary motivator here is actually our edger joiner. It is a 4-inch machine, so the widest board or edge that we can put through here is 4 inches. There are machines out there that go up to 12 inches, and I've seen some now that are for slabs that are based off of a router. The point is that this is going to help us make these boards flat. I have a hunch it's a common misconception what a thickness planer does. A thickness planer does not make a board flat, it just changes its thickness. We're going to be using a thickness planer today, but if we don't get the boards flat, we're going to end up with a board that we don't want. So we're going to use the edger joiner to flatten one side of the board, and that will give the planer something very flat to reference as we put it through and we change the board's thickness. If we didn't do that, a board can actually go through the planer at a very wonky angle, and its thickness has changed, but the flatness of the board has not been altered. I ran some calculations. This is my cut sheet that I created from the design that I made, and I've got everything in here with its dimensions and the material. We need a total of 68 feet at 1 1/4 inch, and we're going to end up planing that down to 3/4 like I mentioned earlier. I think this is 816.5 inches. Of course, we're not going to get all of that from this wood, meaning we're going to have to cut some of this stuff up and make other boards out of it. For example, this knot looks particularly weak to my eye. It's kind of hollow all the way through. That may not be a very ideal board, so we're going to lose a little bit of wood there. So we're going to need quite a bit extra, way more than 68 feet. of 1.25 inches in order to get the 68 feet that we need. My hunch is that this is about where we're gonna lose people. So if you stick around and watch this video, good for you. We're gonna learn something together about accuracy and precision. My experience with people, I'll just broadly lump them all together, is that they don't have the patience for this fine stuff. They prefer rough cut lumber or framing lumber or something, where being within 1/8 is considered highly accurate. And anybody out there who builds cabinets or works with crown molding or does any kind of finish work knows that 1/8 and 1/4 aren't gonna cut it. And I'm not sure how precise we need to be with this cabinet, but I'm not sad that I've put a lot of effort into making sure that things are very, very precise, because so far things have been going smoothly, and I'm not going to change anything now. You might be thinking you should cut that down. It's going to be a lot easier to work with smaller sticks, and you would be right. And I kind of have mixed emotions about that. The reason I don't really want to rip or cross-cut this into smaller lengths is I'm afraid that it may be inefficient, and what we'll end up doing is having a tremendous amount of waste. So let's say I cut these boards in half. I just made my life easier because now I can handle a shorter board. It's much easier to put through the edger joiner, but now I've also committed to anything less than that dimension. So I'm gonna try to work with these in full length, and if it just won't work, I guess we'll have to figure something else out. Looking pretty good. Oh yeah, look at that. So I planed both of these boards, I joined both of these boards at the edge. If you look really close, you can see the difference between those two boards, but they fit together very, very nice. If we flip them to the other side, where I just ran the table saw through, it's less good. So the joiner is definitely worth the effort. So that's basically the process up to the point where we're going to run these through the planer. I'm actually leaving them a wider board for two reasons. One, it minimizes workload because running things through the planer is going to be easier with a larger board. And then we can rip them down to our final dimension once they're all to thickness. So what we'll do now is we'll switch to getting everything ripped, because we don't want to change the setup we have on the Shopsmith until everything's pretty much ripped and we've got one side jointed. Then we can set the planer up, and at that point we can run everything to thickness, and then the last step will be cutting everything to dimension. Isn't it crazy that that was that? Can you believe it? That's what we started with. That's actually not a bad sample. That's looking more real. That has become this beautiful wood. So now we've got everything jointed, everything's nice and flat, and we're ready to work on the thickness planer. I think it bears mentioning that One of the reasons that we're overcutting this is because we're going to end up doing a lot of surgery to these pieces. We're kind of looking for that really premium wood. This is a lot like what we did to create our wood-fired cedar hot tub. We found that we could buy cedar board seconds that were out of grade, but inside that board was a lot of clear wood. And if you buy clear cedar, which is what they make these hot tubs out of, it is outrageously expensive. But if you were to buy a number 2 or worse piece of lumber that was out of grade, and you did what we're doing by doing surgery to the board, you can harvest an abundant amount of beautiful wood. To try to put that into plain English, see this big knot here? Well, we don't really want that in one of our face frames. We'd rather have a really beautiful piece of wood like this right here. So in the end, what we're gonna do is a whole lot of picking and choosing about where we're gonna cut our boards. So this knot is very, very likely going to be cut out of here, and we're gonna use this piece of wood, which is just amazing, and that piece of wood, which is amazing. So for example, this piece has a lot of pitch cracks and stuff in it, and that's not really desirable for what we're gonna do. We left that piece in there because we're gonna rip this into 1¼ inch strips, and just maybe there's something there that might be able to be touched up with wood filler or something like that. But these long, beautiful pieces will produce long pieces of lumber. So by doing surgery and cutting these knots out, we can end up with these beautiful pieces of wood without having to buy or try to mill absolutely perfectly clear wood. So this chunk of pitch cracked wood, we got the boot. It's not any good for this type of stuff. So we already kind of did some surgery at that length. This piece down here had a bunch of knots in it, big knots. So what's the point in keeping that? So we just cut that out. When we get to the doors and the drawers, that's really what we're gonna have to do with this lumber, because there's just too many big knots. And I'm not really sure what we want to end up with, but I don't think we really want that many knots in our wood. Of course, if somebody wanted that, this would be highly desirable, but I think we're kind of after a more clear look. So when we get to the doors and drawers, we'll probably end up doing some surgery here, and it's very, very likely we're gonna end up having to do some laminations to make these pieces, because we just don't have a big enough board that's stable, that's not free to make those pieces. And let's try maybe a 7. Needs to be turned on. There we go. Wow, isn't it hard to believe that we started with such a raw looking piece of wood and we now have this guy. It all turned out good. We went through a lot of wood and we created a lot of shavings. I'll say that our dust collection is right at full. just from planing. We started about right here when we started planing, so we planed that many shavings, a ridiculous amount. This turned out better than I expected. I was kind of trying to strategize a little bit to try to get rid of knots like this and plane them off. Of course, we're not gonna get it completely gone, but I was able to thin that down. I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking it, but I was trying to get rid of some of these pitch cracks, kind of looking at them as we planed each time, trying to figure out whether they could be eliminated, and the answer is no, not really. I feel like this piece I probably put way too much work into. In fact, I can see that this is split right here. So that's all gonna get cut off for sure. But the rest of these look absolutely fantastic. I heard a rumor that our, wait for it, 30 gallons of apple cider has arrived. Anna's been here helping us for a long time, and we recently discovered the cider press that's in our neighborhood. We've heard about it for years. We've had no time to explore it, but we did get some cider. If you've watched a recent video, we kind of did this food haul. We got a little bit of cider from a neighbor. We decided to go out and hit the apples hard and get our own cider, and it sounds like we netted 30 gallons of cider. I've got to go take a look, and I've got to give it a try.
Interesting color change.
Yeah, look at that. Really dark. Is that from the canning process? Or oh, it is. Wow. So it changed just in canning.
Yep.
Hit me, bartender. Oh, I can smell it over here. Oh, I like how you pour me a full glass. Yes. What was your apple connoisseur rating on this?
20 out of 10.
Holy smokes, that's good. And we were afraid we were going to lose the apples because it was like getting colder and colder and colder, and we've been holding on to them forever, but man, in the nick of time. Oh. So you have 4 gallons canned so far. And how many fits in there?
4 gallons in a quart.
That's what one cycle
That's
is?
the jars that fit in there. Yeah.
Wow. And you're going to be canning 17 gallons. That's the plan?
Yeah.
So you're going to be here all night?
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, have fun. Ah, party foul. Wow. All picked from apples that were falling on the ground, or from people who simply don't have the time to pick their apple trees. Total cost, $1 per gallon. Thank you for the help. Just enough to get it done. Perfect. Well, that's gonna do it for today. That's a really big win. I feel like probably looked pretty easy. Alyssa's obviously an amazing editor, so she's gonna make this look like it was easy. And it really was. I think the machines all worked properly. Everything turned out really good. Beautiful wood. So this 1.25 inches, tomorrow we're gonna start dissecting it and finding the wood within a wood. So that knot's gonna go away, that knot's probably gonna go away. Somewhere in there is all the face frames for our base and upper cabinets. There is one strip of 2 inch, and that big guy goes on the end cabinets. We're actually gonna have a wraparound panel, so that face frame is gonna stick out 3/4 inch, and then there's gonna be an end panel that will be a finished piece of wood. So because that end of the cabinet is visible. So we've got just one 2-incher. I decided to hold off on cutting any of this stuff with the knots because I don't know if we're gonna need it. And quite frankly, it would make an okay piece of trim. It's not a great piece of face frame for cabinets, but, and then I saved off just a little bit of material in case we break something or something becomes weak or fragile during the assembly process. We have a little bit of extra material. We only need, according to my notes, 64 feet. And we cut up, let's see, 100 feet, something like that. There's 40, 70, yep, 90, little over 100. We've got a couple of little pieces here. So tomorrow we'll start dissecting that guy, and hopefully we can get the face frames all cut and laid out, potentially even get all the joinery ready to go. One of the delays of many with this project has been kind of a dialogue between Alyssa and I about what do we want the finish to be. I've kind of been leaning away from a very natural finish. I can't tell you why. I'm just kind of paranoid of having like wood overload in the house. I think we see so many homes that are just like, we love wood, and they have 19 different species, and it's just like bad design. Obviously we've got the timber frame here, we've got posts in the garage, we've got posts in the house, and this is fir, and that's exactly the wood that we're working here with, is Douglas fir, same frame actually. So depending on how we finish it, you know, it may look okay. We talked about maybe staining it with a little bit of a gray tone. Alyssa's not too fond of that. We talked about painting it, which this seems like a ridiculous amount of work if we're gonna paint it, right? I mean, why go through all the work to get clear wood if you're just gonna put paint all over it? So hopefully tomorrow, we'll kind of work through some of that as we get some of these pieces laid out. I want to kind of play a little bit with finishes on some just scrap pieces so that her and I can come to an agreement on how to proceed. So basically we just need to get the face frames all cut, get them sanded so that they fit smooth. We do need to run everything back through the joiner. I forgot to do that. And then hopefully we get everything laid out, cut to length, get the joinery done. Then it's a matter of sanding, finishing, staining, or whatever we're gonna do, and then assembling, and the face frames will be ready. One thing I learned today is empty your chip bag before you start planing, because you go through a lot. I guess we did start with pretty thick wood. I was paranoid because the boards were so warped that we would need a lot of extra thickness, and well, in the end it actually worked out okay. So we just planed off 1/2 inch of wood on all those boards. We obviously still have all this wood, and hopefully this, once we kind of learn how to work with the planer, the joiner, and all this stuff will make really beautiful doors and drawers. I love color variation like this. We have some of this in our timber frame. We put our favorite floor joist in the master bedroom, and they have some of this in it, and it's just beautiful to look at. I can just kind of visualize a drawer front in here that just has this really eye-popping color. I think that'd be a really interesting cabinet to look at. Time to clean up, enjoy dinner, and then make some more sawdust tomorrow.